You have a noted record as a human rights activist, and you are an important voice in this country's politics. That being said, with the Syrian refugee crisis, I mean, it's affected the whole world, but especially in Lebanon, just by simple numbers. How do you think the Lebanese government has risen to the challenge? Would you say it's been adequate or more than that?
The government didn't rise appropriately to the challenge, but the population of Lebanon has. And its civil society and its vibrant society has been much better in dealing with the Syrians because it has opened its hands. Miraculously, it has managed to welcome 1,500,000 Syrian refugees practically without governmental intervention, other than security, making sure that those Syrian refugees do not pose a threat on Lebanon's security. And I believe that the situation so far, with time passing, is miraculous. And because nobody can truly explain how 1,500,000 were adopted by a population of 5 million. And if you translate that into figures in the US, it's I would like you to consider that it's like having 100 million refugees flocking into the state of New York alone and asking the people of the state of New York to handle 100 million refugees. With the meager capacities of the Lebanese economy, Lebanese infrastructure, with poverty that exists in many parts where the Syrian refugees have taken home. And I believe that with the ongoing crisis, Lebanon is coming into such challenges that now the government is taking the reins of some control, some planning, some strategy. And I would expect the new government to provide the work community with an action plan on how the people of Lebanon and the government can be helped in sustaining the life of 1,500,000 Syrian refugees in addition to 500 Palestinian refugees, and yet provide for the needs of the host communities. That should not be forgotten. Right. So the issue for Lebanon is balancing out the reality of the Lebanese helping the Syrian population and the need to help the host community in all its difficulties that it's facing economically and socially and in terms of its own infrastructure.
Absolutely. That amount of people in this country would certainly strain resources that aren't exactly adequate to begin with. There seems to be a fear of the permanence of the Syrian refugees, but it seems that the Syrian civil war is entering an endgame. It might take a few more years, but it seems that Assad is prevailing. Do you think that when security is reestablished in Syria, whether it be under the Assad government or under some other form, do you think the Syrian refugees, in your country at least, will return?
The Syrian refugees will have to return. It is a non-issue for the Lebanese people and the Lebanese government to consider their remaining on Lebanese soil, other than for valid domestic residence and labor.
Right.
However, Lebanon is pushing the international community as well as its own internal relationships and dealing with the Syrian refugee crisis, is that for as long as it can take, it's only transient, and that the planning should start already to send the Syrian refugees back to Syria and prepare for their return and prepare for the rebuilding of Syria once the settlement of the crisis has happened.
Right.
Once the security issues in all or part of Syria would have subsided.
Absolutely.
But that would also mean, particularly for minority communities, and I think it would be like a too easy thing to just select or get the Christian Syrians out of Syria and send the Muslims back. I'm speaking very crudely as the Syrians and Lebanese speak. All of the population should be encouraged to return to Syria once stability is reached.
Yeah, absolutely. if any one group from Syria were to remain, it would definitely affect the demographics in Lebanon, certainly.
The demographics in Lebanon, as well as the power balance, which is also extremely fragile.
Exactly, it's fragile, but it seems that it's holding. Lebanon went through its civil war, several phases, 75 to 90. And what you've established here with your government seems to be working. Is Lebanon at least the way the government power is divided up between the groups to form a sort of power sharing agreement, is it a model for other countries in the region? Can this be copied and implemented in Syria after the war, implemented in Iraq, implemented in Yemen? Is it possible for that?
Look, like any system, there are very good things in our system that can be replicated, are welcome to be replicated, and others that are very bad that I hope that no regime will take, such as the systemic corruption that we have in Lebanon. However, the positive in the Lebanese system is something that you cannot probably find elsewhere, is diversity. The capacity of Lebanon that has succeeded with major difficulties most of the time to manage unity in diversity and diversity in unity within unified state. This is extremely valuable for countries that have only known dictatorships, that have only known the controls of one community over the other, that does not benefit from free press, from a vibrant civil society. I think Lebanon's model is not only limited to a political system, but also to freedoms, to the extent to which fundamental rights are upheld and are used, are well known and apprehended by the citizen and are used by the citizen. And I think that's the mix of culture, civil society, media, freedoms, in addition to diversity within institutions that are necessary to replicate in the new Syria or in the new Iraq or any new country where democracy is striving to survive.
That's an excellent point. It's not just the political system in Lebanon that works, it's the
No.
civil society and
And the rest.
right, and the civil
Freedoms and the feeling that you are a citizen of the country, although one of the weaknesses of that system is that most citizens don't get through a filter of a religious community. And I think that the challenge for Lebanon, as the challenge is going to be for the other countries in the region, is secularism. Lebanon
Absolutely.
is a model in secularism, with the exception of family law. Laws in Lebanon have no linkage to religious law, whether it be Islamic or Christian or
Absolutely.
Jewish. The importance of our political system is that we have a secular system with a component of rights granted to religious communities. I think this is a model that can work, that can provide the balance between individual rights and collective rights for religious communities, including how Islam relates to the state. But that's a huge challenge that Lebanon has been successful in upholding.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the law is secular because the parties here identified largely with certain confessional groups, and that seems to be changing. Do you think that change is going to continue to occur, where the parties at some point in the future will identify as secular rather than Sunni or Shia or Maronite? Do you think that'll happen?
It will take a long time before this happens, although I am one of those that are working towards a secular state in Lebanon, that is to translate what we have in the constitution into all institutions. The sociology of politics, that is very much linked to corruption and to fear, is a tool for control. I mean, this communal, this exclusivity of or identification with the religious community and the political party has much to say about fears that are entertained about some populist approach to politics, some clientelistic view of relationship between a political leader and the people, with a weak state. Society is much stronger than the state, militarily but also in services. The state is not the only provider of services. Services transit through religious communities or through political parties that are all vectors of what I would call the systemic corruption that is plaguing the country. So I believe that, that being said, the tool for correcting the political system in Lebanon is fighting corruption. That's why it is so important. And fighting corruption and a new electoral system will bring more diversity within the religious community's representatives, which will bring a better functional democracy for Lebanon. This is our own need to improve our political system. We still have a long way to go, but as the saying goes, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed is king.
Yes.
And I believe that Lebanon, compared to the neighbors, can boast a tradition of diversity, of freedoms, and of an active, vibrant society that compensates the clientelistic, corrupt political system that is in place.
Yeah, it seems like what you're saying. It's the political portion is the easiest to replicate, but it relies on so much else, which is harder to replicate. The civil society, the freedoms, and the anti-corruption measures.
There was a very nice book by a Lebanese intellectual by the name of I forgot his name right now. But the title of the book was very telling. It read "Democracies Without Democrats." Institutions are not enough if you don't have the culture behind it, if you don't use the system.
Absolutely.
And I believe that this what would come with time. This is what the Lebanese had to learn over decades, if not centuries, of being extremely proud about their own rights, about their own freedoms, of their own presence. It has gone to extent of communitarianism, confessionalism, but the tide will probably come when citizens will have their own say in their independent relationship with the state. And the challenge in Lebanon in developing state capacity rather than only reinforcing what already exists in terms of freedoms and liberty within society.
Absolutely. And speaking about the relationship between citizen and government, you and I actually met at the inaugural meeting of Nudge Lebanon, behavioral economics group. Do you think that effort, it seems like it's going to be positive, but considering all the factors in Lebanon, including the corruption, how much of a change do you think this group is going to bring about?
Look, like the nudge goes, it will have the success of a nudge, right? So it will.
I suppose so.
it will add a push to a movement that sometimes it will not resolve the issues of corruption, but it will probably make the public services better delivered to people. It will improve relationship between citizen and state. It will create poles of excellence within the civil service. It can reinforce the relationship between civil society, because the initiative that you have mentioned is a civil society initiative. It's an initiative of individuals, not of leaders. Unlike other countries where it's always been a top-down movement for creating nudges next to governmental agencies or governments. In Lebanon, it's very much a bottom-up movement where it's a movement of intellectuals, of experts, of civil society organizations that are offering services to public organizations that have responded positively, with the hope that this will be taken up by the government at one point in time in the future.
Absolutely. That's interesting. I never considered that nudge not only could affect the citizen, but also the civil service, and that it would, as you said, create pools of excellence. I think that's interesting.
But that's what Nudge Lebanon is trying to do, is creating small projects, like with Électricité du Liban, which is the electricity agency, and with some municipalities, to telling them that with very little one can do much. And I believe that in a time of economic difficulties, of financial difficulties, this approach is welcome. And I believe it will take root. It has been beneficial elsewhere, and I believe that in Lebanon, because of the makeup of Lebanon, I believe that this movement could also be beneficial.
Absolutely.
broad manner.
It seemed like seemed to create quite a bit of interest, and the case studies that were brought during that were showed during the inaugural meeting showed some pretty good success. I was,
You know, that's the importance. There's so much excellence with the Lebanese as individuals. And the
absolutely.
Lebanese are amazing entrepreneurs, but they are horrendous organizers at state level. Look at, we've started talking about the Syrian refugee crisis.
Yeah.
The Syrian refugee crisis cannot be, the success of its management cannot be explained if you do not take into consideration that leadership role of individuals, of small communities, of small NGOs, with foreign funding, however, with no intervention of the state. It is very much haphazard, but this has something to do with a positive chaos in Lebanon
Right.
that sometimes works. However, that's the strength of Lebanon. At the same time, it's its weakness. An old uncle of mine who lived in the US considered that one single Lebanese may be worth 100 Americans, but 100 Lebanese were worth nothing because the Lebanese could not create collaborations, were weak and were unsuccessful so far in creating strong state institutions, which established countries such as the US and others were much better at doing,
Absolutely.
leaving citizens in the position of service receiver. And I believe that Lebanon will have to find this balance of excellent individuals, very entrepreneurial, coming up with great ideas. They are the leaders in everything they do, including in politics and in the business community, in science, and in society, in university, in the media. But I think that excellence should move to the public sector. And this is where it's so costly for Lebanon to have a very weak government and very strong society.
Absolutely. Concerning entrepreneurship and the government, it's obvious to tell that the Lebanese are natural entrepreneurs, but there is a high unemployment rate among the youth. Do you think that's due to government mismanagement?
Yes, I mean, it's due to a number of factors, including also a real fact that many Lebanese that don't find employment in Lebanon look for employment elsewhere.
Absolutely.
In the Gulf, in the world. This is why some figures put the Lebanese living abroad at 10 times the number of Lebanese living in Lebanon. There's so much movement of expatriates out of Lebanon that is caused by that very small market. A series of problems over time. A displeasure of youth with clientelism. If you're not a client of a leader, you cannot access public positions. And the market economy is relatively limited. This has helped the Lebanese to grow wings and to build ships from antiquity till today. It is again a strength and a weakness because it's forcing Lebanese to leave rather than to stay and to develop. And I believe that with time, with better management of public service, with better management of government and a better functional democracy, I believe that the balance can be made in the appropriate number of Lebanese leaving, not because they have to, but because they're looking for much better that they can get in Lebanon. That's understandable. They must not flee Lebanon having to do so, as was the case during wartime. But if they go to improve their lifestyle, and with this global village that's turning into a very big marketplace, that's where the Lebanese are excelling as well.
Yeah, there might, if things don't change there, would you think there might be a brain drain in Lebanon in a way?
There already is a brain drain. Some would tell you that the best minds are leaving. But we need to retain as much good as possible because a lot has to be done in Lebanon. I am committed to making the country better. That's why I am into politics. I could be in private practice, making a lot more money, but I know that if the public good is not served, the private good of individual Lebanese will be less served than it is.